So welcome everyone to what is our second Golden Key System Leadership webinar. A few points of housekeeping before we get into the heart of our topic today. So you are welcome to keep introducing yourselves in the chat box. There will be no slides during this webinar, but the session is being recorded and I will share it with you all probably tomorrow. If you want to ask a question, there is a Q&A at the end of the session, but you can ask your question throughout the session by using the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. There is a Q&A option. Type in your question in there. Keep an eye on the questions as well, because if there is any that you're particularly interested in hearing an answer to, you can upvote that question, and those will be the ones that we will put to the panel first. All right, so for those who don't know Golden Key, we are a partnership between services, commissioners, the voluntary sectors, and people with lived experience across Bristol, and we work together to improve services for people with multiple complex needs. Our work is overseen by a partnership board, which comprises of representatives from our partner organisations. So we strongly believe that to achieve our objectives, we need to provide services that meet the needs of our very diverse client group. And that is why we strive to have a very diverse partnership board. And our members have also committed to a statement of action which puts equality, diversity and inclusion at the heart of the Golden Key programme. We have a dedicated EDI steering group as well, which oversees that work. Today we have 3 people with us. Saida, welcome Saida. Saida is the chair of the Golden Key EDI steering group. She's also a board member. She is recently, the head of diversity and inclusion at the government's actuary department. And before that, she worked for Bristol City Council and the Office for Students. Then we have John Simpson. John is the independent chair of the Golden Key Partnership Board. John is a very experienced manager, leader, consultant, mentor. He has been Director of Education in 3 different local authorities, and he was the founding director and chief executive of Tribal Education. And finally, we have Jason Burrowes. Jason is a member of Independent Future, which is our group of consultants with lived experience. He has sat on the Golden Key board for longer than anyone else in this room, actually. So he is our most experienced member. He ensures that the client's voice remains at the heart of our work. Jason has also recently been appointed as trustee for the Independent Mental Health Network. So without further ado, I am going to pass the word to Saida.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us bright and early at this breakfast webinar. I hope you have, like me, your cups of tea handy. Well, thank you for joining us. So I'm going to speak just for about 10 minutes. And like Sarah said, it's meant to be an informal sort of conversation. We haven't got any slides. And the purpose really of our talks is to share with you our personal experiences and insights. So for me, I've sat on board since 2011, so in the last sort of 10 years, and I started off as a school governor. So I was in Lewisham at the time, and I served as a governor on a school body for about 3 years prior to moving to Bristol, and it was a primary school in Lewisham. But that was my first experience of, you know, being a board member. It was quite a large board, about 16 people. So you can imagine the first day I walked in there and saw, you know, 15 other faces. Very, very nerve-wracking experience. But since then, I've also served as a school governor in my children's school in Bristol, and I served as a vice chair of governors in Bristol as well. Professionally, I'm a solicitor by profession. So in the legal profession as well, I've sat as a committee member for the Social Housing Law Association, both in Bristol and in the Midlands. So I did that for about 5 years as well. I'm currently a non-executive director for Ashley Community Housing, a small refugee sector housing association based in Bristol. And of course, I sit on the board of Golden Key, as Sarah said, and I also chair the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee at Golden Key. I was a director of Bristol Law Society as well, so I did that for 2 years, but recently stepped down because I'm currently serving as head of diversity and inclusion in the civil service. So I've stepped down from the legal role. But as you can see, quite a broad range of you know, board and committee member experience. So before I just launch into the conversation about the importance of having the diverse board, one of the things I've certainly received a few messages from people on LinkedIn and from conversations is that, you know, people who are considering joining boards are a bit nervous that, you know, how much do I have to know before I join the board? And, you know, do I have to know this and that? And what I've said is that like with any other role, it is a learning curve. So, you know, the first board you sit on, you're not going to be, you know, quite the finished product. It's about learning and experience and going through the journey. And I certainly remember when I was a board member at Lewisham, when I went into that first meeting for months, I'm sure about 3 to 6 months, I was just terrified of speaking in front of so many people that I didn't really know. And so we're going to talk you through some of the ways that as chairs and committee chairs on boards, you can make people feel more comfortable and able to contribute to the discussions. So why is it important to have the, you know, diversity of thought and diverse board membership? I think one of the crucial reasons is about better decision making. I think we can all sort of relate to the fact that when you have multiple perspectives and you can listen to those multiple perspectives and look at the pros and cons and things from different perspectives, then you could make better decisions. And there's a lot of, I mean, in the blog that John and I wrote, which I'm sure some of you may have read as well, there is a lot of evidence base for this as well. So if you look at companies such as McKinsey & Co. in their reports about diversity, particularly board diversity, but also same principles could apply to executive teams and also the diversity of your workforce. But essentially, companies that have diverse boards tend to perform better financially. We're not talking of small numbers as well. We're talking about, in terms of financial performance, up to 30% outperforming other companies. So I think it's not an insignificant difference. And the McKinsey reports, I think, especially the first one, focuses really on ethnicity and also gender diversity. But in subsequent reports, so their 2018, 2021 reports, they're looking at all diversity, so all underrepresented groups. So it's really important to understand that that practice of looking at things from different angles actually helps your decision making. And another way I like to think about this is looking at what the polar opposite of having diversity of thought is. And really, there is this phenomenon that we hear about, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, the concept of groupthink. And this is where, if you have on a board, because you can have this in a board as well, if you have people with two similar backgrounds, like all male, you know, the same socioeconomic groups, etc., what you tend to have is that people conform and they really don't challenge each other, and there's a lot of head nodding and people just agreeing with each other just because they come from that similar backgrounds and they don't have the experience. And sometimes we say that you don't know what you don't know. You know, that's your life experience and you may not think of things from a different perspective. And that's why it's better to invite people with different backgrounds and experiences to actually join your board. Again, there's evidence base for that, and we mentioned that in the blog that John and I wrote, and we mentioned the Parker Review, which is, you know, was led by Sir John Parker, and that was really looking at the ethnic diversity of UK boards. And that was back in 2016. I think, you know, in his introduction to that review, he mentions that in terms of the FTSE 100, 2% ethnic diversity at the time. I think you all have picked up in the news this week that, you know, that's gone down to 0%. So, I mean, one of the things that I will pick up later is, you know, looking at, you know, what's the reason for that? Why have we gone backwards rather than moving forward? And I think an important thing that we all should really, as our call for action today, is really have in our minds that, you know, we're not just here because we just come into a webinar, but actually what action can we take? How do we take action as a result of having the discussions that we're having today? And one of the things I'll mention briefly now is that John and I are involved in the Stepping Up program in Bristol. And that is an initiative that's actually seen organizations in Bristol taking action. And I was a participant on Stepping Up in 2018. And what Stepping Up, and I think it's now in the 4th year, applications open to all underrepresented groups. And what they've been able to do is actually build a pipeline of more than 200 diverse leadership that's, you know, can be utilized nationally, so to speak. So I think it's really important that even though we're looking at all these reviews, talking about these reports, talking about McKinsey and lots of UK government reports as well, what do we do to actually change the situation we find ourselves in? So moving swiftly on as well, in terms of looking at the implications as well of, you know, having that diversity of thoughts. And I thought a really, really good book, and I believe I mentioned this in the blog as well, is the book called Rebel Ideas, The Power of Diverse Thinking by Matthew Said. And he gives numerous examples and it's cross sector as well. You know, he looks at different fields and there's a lot of evidence base for what he's written about. But I particularly like the example he gave about September the 11th and the CIA's investigation of September the 11th, which comes in, is quite early on in the book. It's on Audible for those of you who are, you know, who like to listen rather than read the books, but it's on Audible as well. So it's quite an easy read. But he talks about, you know, the CIA obviously are very, very intelligent. The criteria for joining very, very high. So we're talking of a really high IQ environment. But because of their workforce demographics at the time, and because largely their employees came from really similar backgrounds, they actually missed a lot of clues that could have helped in, you know, really understanding what was going on before the September the 11th attacks. So I think that's a really, really good example of the fact that the implications, if we do not have that diversity, and, you know, what the consequences could be. But like I said, he does give many cross-sector examples, not just the CIA. And he does talk about the contrast as well. When you do have, you know, diversity of thoughts, you get greater innovation, creativity in organizations. This recently, a report by the Mayor of London, where he's looking at the central London areas, also talks about the fintech industry. And in the fintech industry as well, you have a lot of diversity in terms of those people who've created those companies. And because of that, they've done really, really well in London. So that's one area worth looking at. So just, you know, taking it back to Golden Key and what we've done as a board, I just wanted to say that recently, especially on the EDI committee. In December, we conducted a board skills audit where we looked at all our board members, the skill sets and areas for development, because we wanted to look at our board as a whole and where we can increase our diversity, because diversity is not only about ethnicity or gender, but also on a board, it could be about the subject matter expertise of the board members as well, and making sure that you do have that broad experience that enables you to consider matters effectively as a board. But I think the key point I'd like to raise is that this has to be done consciously and actively. So, you know, we're constantly speaking to our chair, John, about what we can do to diversify and who we might need to invite onto the board so that we have a better perspective. And that's what it's all about. And part of that we do mention in the blog as well is getting to know your board members and having one-to-ones with them. Obviously difficult at the moment, but you can have a virtual coffee, I guess, on Zoom, but also, you know, just not meeting people formally at the board meetings, but trying to meet with them one-to-one so that you understand what they do and understand what their strengths are, and then you can delegate to them as well, because you part of their being on the board is developing their skills as well. And it's really about teamwork and how you can work together. So I'm conscious of time. I'm sure I've exhausted my 10 minutes, but yeah, just by way of summary, it's, you know, really about diversity of thought, considering multiple perspectives and how that helps you make better decisions. But also in terms of benefits include innovation, creativity, and also financial benefits, as we've seen in reports such as McKinsey & Co. But also in the public sector, we want value for money, and we want, you know, to benefit from considering as many perspectives as we can. So I'm going to leave it there, Sarah, and pass it back to you.
All right, thank you, Saida. John, do you want to take it away next?
Okay, thank you, and good morning to everybody. It's -4 degrees where I am at the moment, so it's very nice to feel a bit of warmth. Saida's made a very cogent and clear case for the importance of having a diverse board. And in the next 10 minutes, I just want to talk about the challenges of actually building a diverse board, building a diverse partnership board, and building a diverse partnership board in Bristol. I think everybody will know that as a city, Bristol's made a big commitment to partnership working. It's an approach reflected in Marvin's conception of his role as mayor. He sees himself very strongly as the mayor of the city, not just the mayor of the council. And it's demonstrated in the One City approach and the One City plan. And that approach has been applied to the way the city has responded to the challenges it faces through the various One City boards. And of course, this is an approach that's for some time now and quite widely being used in the public sector to respond to complex issues in society. For example, public health approaches to knife crime or drug-related issues. So this context, the Bristol One City approach, provides a great starting point for our work as the Golden Key Partnership. So our partnership, as Sarah Jane has said, has been in existence for just over 6 years now, and we've got a year of funding left. And we're committed to capturing our learning and sharing it with a view to influence in the future. So, for example, whilst there's a broad consensus that partnership approaches are the most effective way of addressing complexity, we have a duty to actually show, using evidence, that this is in fact the case. Now, of course, our partnership is based in Bristol, and research tells us that in Bristol, despite all its vibrancy, it's one of the most unequal cities in the UK. So, for example, research commissioned by the West of England Combined Authority in 2018, just 2 years ago, found the city to be the 7th worst place in England and Wales to be of Black, Asian and minority ethnic heritage in terms of outcomes across education, employment, criminal justice and housing. And this is the feature of the context in which our clients actually live their lives. So whatever the focus of a partnership's work, be it the built environment, a healthy environment, transport provision, or services for people with complex needs, for me, it's impossible to imagine that a partnership's work will succeed if it doesn't put a focus on equality, diversity, and inclusion at its heart. And that lens, the EDI lens, if you like, must look at all aspects of an initiative, from the way we engage with clients, from the way services are delivered, through staffing structures, to management arrangements, and of course, the governance arrangements. So today I want to focus specifically the EDI lens on the governance work of the Golden Key Partnership Board, and as I understand it, my role in that as the independent chair, in the hope that this sharing of this experience will contribute to identifying best practice, which will be useful more broadly than in Bristol and with our board. And I'm going to end by suggesting 7 important actions that can be taken to create a diverse board. So first, I'm going to just consider the design of the board, its size and its makeup. So the designers of the Golden Key Partnership Board sought to make the board inclusive in terms of the organisations from which the representatives on it came. This has resulted in a large board of 20-ish people representing a mix of statutory agencies and the voluntary and community sector. Now, whilst the statutory agencies broadly identify themselves, the council, the police, the NHS, an early decision was taken to ensure that a range of perspectives were present from the voluntary and community sector. So this resulted in an agreement that there should be reps from organisations focusing, for example, on vulnerable women, on vulnerable young people, on people facing homelessness or engaging with drug and alcohol issues, and organisations with specific focus on equalities. So this range of organisations in themselves are well placed to provide multiple perspectives on people with complex needs. Now, the initial design also emphasised the importance of the voice of lived experience and that the importance of that influence in Golden Key at all levels. So right from the start, there have been 3 places on the partnership board specifically to enable that voice to be heard. And those representatives are decided entirely by our partner organisation, Independent Futures, which represents that voice in this city. So on a structural level, a diverse perspective was built in at the design phase in terms of organisational inclusivity, organisational perspective, and the voice of lived experience. So I'd now like to move on to consider the truth that power and influence reflects patterns of inequality. So right from the start, it was clear that partner organisations should be represented by people in decision-making roles, those who had the authority to make decisions and to deploy resources. Virtually all the organisations that had formally committed to the partnership acted accordingly, resulting in a very influential board. If you look at that in terms of the people who ended up being sat around the table, whilst the board was broadly 50-50 in terms of gender, it was almost entirely white. Now, even though Golden Key is not an organisation with any legal duties placed on it, it's a partnership after all, it is funded by public resources. And it seems to me that the spirit of the Equality Act's public sector equality duty should apply to it, and specifically to me in my role as independent chair. And I believe I have a clear responsibility to take action to pursue the public sector equality duty assertively. So, of course, there are many protected characteristics covered by the Equality Act, but it seemed to me in the situation I described in this city at this time, with the composition of the board, it seemed entirely reasonable to prioritise looking at the diversity lens initially through a race discrimination angle, and that this protected characteristic should be given priority. So in response to that, a series of steps have been taken. The first is to make Golden Key's commitment to working towards EDI widely known throughout comms, our behaviours and our actions. This communication must be honest, believable and tangible. One way, for example, we did this was through launching the Bristol Leadership Challenge, focused on strengthening system leadership in the city. One of which one of our published objectives was that all the participants on this programme must reflect the diversity of Bristol's population. And we took a range of actions to ensure that this actually happened in practice. The second step was to build relationships with relevant groups, organisations and individuals through existing networks in Bristol. Working with the Deputy Mayor, we accessed the list of BAME leaders in our city and reached out to them to encourage their involvement. Alongside this, we made links with organisations such as Bristol Refugee Rights, Nilari and SARI, all organisations focused on people and communities experiencing race discrimination. We made close links with related initiatives in the city, as Saida has mentioned, such as Stepping Up, where there is black talent aplenty. And lastly, we made links with groups such as the Black Staff Group, and by the way, the staff group with disabilities at Bristol City Council. And through all of this networking, we built understanding of Golden Key's mission, the board member role, and our commitment to EDI. The third step we took was to follow up with individuals to demonstrate the difference they could make and make it clear we would support and encourage and enable them to have a powerful voice. So to make the board more diverse, structurally we had to expand the board even further to ensure that we were able to accommodate a new range of perspectives. So the outcome being a larger, more diverse and enriched board that is more confident about meeting the needs of clients from all communities and working in an EDI-informed way. So just to end with my 7 learning points. The first is to recognise that having a diverse board presents different opportunities and constraints for a partnership board than for the board of a single organisation. Secondly, that working towards a diverse board should be non-negotiable and should be deliberate. Thirdly, that the design of the board itself should promote diverse membership and perspectives through its representative structure. Fourthly, that a board needs to demonstrate its commitment to the pursuit of EDI through its comms, behaviours and work programme. Fifthly, that relationships must be built with equalities organisations and community and interest groups to support and demonstrate the board's commitment. In turn, those relationships will enable us to meet individuals who are the potential board members of the future. Sixthly, that places must be found on boards that do not require the individuals who occupy them to have positions of ultimate or senior authorities in their organisation. Without doing that, you will just reinforce the existing distribution of power. And lastly, that all board members, as Saida has said, must receive the support they need to be effective board members. So that's a brief summary of our experience, and we really look forward to hearing your questions and comments about it. Back to you, Sarah Jane.
Thank you, John. That was really interesting. Right, Jason, on to you.
Good morning, everyone. I came up with this at about 4 o'clock in the morning, so it worked. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to Saida and John for warming you up for me. It's cold outside, isn't it? I have been a member of this board for 6 years, and I'm going to try and break up my presentation into what it was like when I first joined. A time ago in here, Sarah. And when I first joined the board, I've got to be honest, it was like an alien. It was like the only the only way I can describe it is like going to a club and then you've got the line where the VIPs go in, and you're always thinking it's all happening up there. Like you're downstairs with the general public. And I remember once I got into the VIP part, and when I got up there, I looked around and I felt so out of place that I thought the action was downstairs. So I went back downstairs. And it was a bit like that when I joined the board. It was professionals, titles, intellectuals, and then you've got me, lived experience. I'm a Londoner. I come from South London. Weirdly, I grew up in Lewisham, Saida. So, and I think that gave me a kind of a benefit, because part of my life from childhood growing up has been having to fit into groups of people that don't look like me, don't speak like me. So I'm used to that. So going into that room, I would have most probably gave people the impression that I was totally confident. I go up to people, I say hi, I'd introduce my son, my queen, because that would break the ice. But the reality is that for me to feel confident in that environment, I felt I was the one making the moves to make the people of the board feel comfortable, whereas really coming from where I come from, the board should have planned to make me feel comfortable. And I don't think in the beginning, because it was an evolving kind of relationship for everybody on the partnership board, even though most of the partners knew each other because they work in that field or they know of each other. So that kind of got neglected to a certain extent. I used to talk, I could talk for Britain, I can, and I come up with some really good ideas. And I came up with ideas at the partnership board, and it took me 2 years to realize if I didn't say action, then whatever I said might as well just go out to the whole world and just get lost, go out in the sky, because I had ideas, but I didn't realize the structure of a partnership board and how you get things done. That took me maybe 2 years. 2 years of relationship building. I love the board now because I know them. I've built relationships that I feel like I'm respected. I've grown in the 6 years of being a part of that partnership board. I don't agree with everything, but I understand people have different perspectives. But I realize that I have a perspective. I've been invited on this board. It's for me to feel like equal. It's for me to make sure that I'm heard. I represent Independent Futures, which has been a part of this process, has been the core of this process when that money was given to Bristol and the partners to have this approach. So that was the beginning. The middle part, I've got it written here because I've got to read on. I don't want Sarah like telling me off or anything, but so that was the settling phase. When John Simpson joined the partnership board, that for me, and I'm just talking from my perspective, that allowed another perspective to join that group. I didn't know John. I didn't know anything about John. I didn't know family, nothing. I didn't know anything. But the energy that he brought to that group galvanized a change. And I felt that change. So I felt more confident. Instead of coming in and saying good morning and how are you, it was genuine. It wasn't like I've got to make these people like me so that I feel comfortable. It was now I'm comfortable because I've built these relationships. It's been 2 years. So that was a great thing. The reason why diversity is important on managerial level from a lived experience, I'm just going to talk about a lived experience. We bring something that's unique, that is not brought to those meetings by the professionals. It just isn't, and I don't think it can be. I really don't think it can be. I think that the unique selling point of lived experience is that we bring depth to what the work that the professionals do. And I believe that I bring, I'm not there to beat anybody up, but I let people know that the partnership board knows that I understand what they're trying to do and how difficult it is. And then I can transfer that information to my community. And I've got a very diverse community because I'm in a dual heritage relationship. And I can partake that so that people understand why things take the time they take to get done. I've got 3 minutes. So moving on to where we're at now. As you can see, Saida, John, I can't really even add to that. What I would say is, though, we're in a time, because of what's happened recently, and that has galvanized this kind of energy. Lived experience is integral to this process, because it brings the depth, it brings the emotion, it brings the unmechanical data part of it, because I believe in John, I believe in Saida. You can bring that. I can't bring that. I would just replicate what you are bringing. I'm trying to bring, and I think lived experience brings a different perspective, which helps to reconnect professionals to the people they're trying to help. Because sometimes the distance between the people that decide and the people that get the help is so far that you might as well be aliens sitting on the table. A lot of planning needs to go around how do you make that accessible to people of lived experience. I'm a South Londoner, I'm confident, I can blag it, but what about lived experience that don't have those skills? I remember people joining me on the partnership board, spending 1 week and that was it. They didn't have the resilience that was inbuilt in me because of the struggles that I've gone through from childhood to now. That made me stick it out and create those relationships. So yeah, planning has to go into it. It can't be just a knee-jerk, yeah, get lived experience. Why are you getting them? What is their input? What is their power in that partnership board? Because everybody on the partnership board seems to know their power. You know, it needs to be clear. Equalities and diversity and inclusion is not just a word that people should use and kind of feel an empathetic feeling about. It has to be an action. There has to be an action attached to it, even if it's an individual action. You can't get your organization to do it, but you can carry some of that learning, not just on the partnership board, but when you go to where you live and the communities that you live amongst, which I would assume mostly is not the inner cities or the complex needs clients areas, that you carry that message to, for want of a better word, for the privileged white people that do a magnificent job. They do. I'm not trying to make people lose their jobs. I'm just trying to get people to understand the communities that this country is made up of. And we've all contributed to it. And it can't just be lip service. It has to be educational, cultural, and real. It just has to be. You know what? I'm going to end this with it's just a thing that I wrote, and I would recommend people go on the Golden Key newsfeed, and I've written something, and what I've written at the end here, it encapsulates everything for me. When I think of my son, I know that aspirations and having access to racial diverse role models is extremely important. I want him to see people that look like him and he identifies with doing well. He has as much right and capability to be whatever he wants to be, and not seeing himself represented in powerful or well-paid jobs means he is already disadvantaged. I understand that EDI movement and visual representation will take time, but I do not want to acknowledge it is a slow process. I want to shout that it is too slow. And this is not okay. Racial inequality has been talked about for too long, well before the civil rights movement, and that was 60 years ago. We need to take action. It's not about making, it's good to feel uncomfortable, but I'm not holding society responsible for what happened historically, but I will hold society responsible for what happens now. And we are society. So that kind of says it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. That was really good. Thank you very much. All right, so please feel free to add your questions. We have one there. I've got a few that I can put to the panel as well. But yeah, please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A box. I will start with the question we've received, which is, can you, all three of you, suggest where to look for a board to join, how to start the journey of being a board member?
Yeah. John, did you want to go first?
You go first, Saida.
Okay. I just wanted to say yes, in the blog that John and I wrote, I did mention an organisation, Be On Board. So that's a really good, it's a Bristol-based, a really, really good organisation. You know, join their mailing list and read a lot of useful articles that they say, and they explain to you how you can start. So they run free events that you can attend. Another good one in Bristol is Transpire. So that's a really good network that I attend their meetings as well. And there's a lot of really experienced board members who are giving back to the community, running training courses. And again, you can join them. So yeah, over to you, John.
Be On Board, of course, is specifically focused on getting more Black and minority ethnic people onto boards. So that's their mission, isn't it?
Yes.
In the private sector, you've got, for example, Moon Consulting, who recruit to boards, and they have, for example, they have a not-for-profit practice within Moon Consulting. But those are the ones I know of.
Yes, Jason.
I just wanted, of course, it's self-promotion here, but up there, Independent Futures was my gateway to getting on this board. And as much as I appreciate that, it took the lottery money to make this happen. So I would advise anybody of lived experience to join any group where you have a voice and be resilient, and you will, if you have a consistent voice, you will achieve something within that system. And I don't think you can expect to do much more than that when you join these situations. You have to be resilient, and you have to be mindful that other opinions matter. It's not just from my color perspective that it matters from everybody's perspective. And then there's a meeting place that needs to be arrived at that satisfies everybody, which is really helpful.
Wonderful.
And
We also
Sarah,
have a, sorry,
I was just going to add as well that, you know, the Times, they publish the public appointment. You can see some of the board roles in there as well. And there is a huge shortage of school governors at the moment. So I think that's another, you know, route in, because by being a school governor, you actually support our education system and, you know, support the community in terms of education. And, you know, that relates to some of the inequalities that John has mentioned previously, but I think that's a really good way. And I spent 5 years doing that. I learned so much and made so many friends in my children's school. So it's a really great opportunity. I'd recommend that.
I was also going to mention Vosca, who advertises trustee roles. And I know many charities also are crying out for trustees. And actually charities have come under fire in recent years for lack of diversity on their board of trustees. So I think they would all welcome some diversity on their board. Right, our next question is from Richard. So this is his question. Whilst much of the published evidence presents a business or legal case for EDI, what comes through particularly strongly from your comments is the social justice argument, that bringing together multiple voices is fundamentally the right thing to do and should be the key purpose of the board. From your experience, what do you see as the main challenges of making a social justice argument for equality, diversity and inclusion, and how can they be tackled?
Okay. I suppose the starting point has got to be to make the case that social justice is a good thing, as opposed to, you know, and therefore it's something that's worth kind of fighting for. Because I think it'd be fair to say there are lots of forces in society which actually might not agree with that. So I think that's where you've got to have an unshakable commitment to addressing social justice. I think it must be a basic human right that every individual in society is able to fulfill their potential. And if you believe that, then you've got to accept that at the moment there are lots of barriers to that. And when you benefit from a resource, especially a public resource, such as we have done in Golden Key, that resource must be used responsibly on behalf of the maximum number of potential beneficiaries, and that those beneficiaries shouldn't be determined by their protected characteristics. They should be protected by their underlying needs, and any barriers or blocks that result in that not happening must be addressed. I don't know, Saida, Joseph, if you want to add anything there.
Yeah, certainly. I think firstly, I just want to say, I mean, Jason referred to before, touched on the civil rights movements, you know, it's starting from that and the reason why those movements occurred. We've seen Black Lives Matter movements last year as well. And one of the things I would stress about all of these movements, in particular the millennials, and you know the expectations of young people these days, and certainly after Black Lives Matter protests last year, a lot of young people that I've spoken to are really, you know, they're really forward thinking, and they have this expectation. When they're applying for jobs, they're looking at websites to see which organizations are actually listening in terms of social justice and doing the right thing and talking about equality, diversity and inclusion, and having, you know, things at work such as staff networks, and having a strategy around how to deal with equality, diversity and inclusion matters. So I think there's going to be increasingly, as the youth become more and more empowered, which is happening a lot these days. We've got youth mayors in Bristol, we've got young people, and we also what happened with the climate change protests as well. And, you know, young people really getting their voices heard because of social media, they're mobilizing and they're really saying that we don't want this, and this is what we expect from society. This is what we expect from employers. And I think that is going to help put a lot of employers under that pressure that actually we do need to do better because we want to attract millennials to come and work for us, but they have certain expectations, and they will be looking at our websites to see if we're doing all this thing and if we're changing. So I think it's part of that as well. There's also the corporate social responsibility aspect about organizations really thinking about their actual local communities and how they're contributing to strengthening those communities and developing those communities. And I think John has touched on that and used Bristol as an example, and you know, the various areas that we want to improve as, you know, a city. So yeah, that's what I'll say.
Thank you. So our next question is, in your experience, how well represented do you think East Asians are in these kinds of diversity discussions?
I mean, I'll just briefly say, I mean, I don't have actual evidence in terms of specifically East Asians, but you know, I mentioned before, I'm a solicitor by background, and I think one of the topical areas in diversity at the moment is the fact that in the last sort of couple of decades, what we've done is group a lot of minority ethnic groups together. So we've got this term BAME, which, you know, a lot of people are now taking issue with, because that just gives us this, you know, term that you can just throw everybody into this box. And over time, we haven't really paid much attention to the different groups and the different outcomes within that phrase. So I know that there's a lot of work going into that, and people, you know, taking objection to that phrase, and we're doing a lot of work around, you know, what phrase to change that to, if that is changed. But I think the interesting thing to note is that organizations are now listening to people voicing their opinions about that, you know, putting everybody in that box. And I'll use the Law Society as an example. Like I said, I was one of the directors of the Bristol Law Society, and in December, the National Law Society published a report. And what we found is that the laws, I mean, the legal profession, we've come a long way in terms of our diversity and inclusion journey from when I joined the profession in '97 to now. And when I joined, the rates of diversity were very low, especially in terms of ethnicity. Now we've reached 17.5%, which is really great. But one of the things that we picked up in the December report is that out of that 17.5%, so people from Caribbean and African background were only about 5%, and the Asian community was about 12%. So people then asked, a lot of solicitors then said, actually, we need to break this down and know what's actually going on and what the outcomes are for the different ethnicity groups. So I think it's a really valid question. And what we need to do now is really look at these figures and look at the data a lot closer, and try and, you know, do a lot more work around it.
I remember, you know, when I started work as the Director of Education, and this was in Brent in London, the most culturally diverse place in Europe at the time, is data on ethnicity was collected under 3 headings: Black, Asian and white. Those were the 3 headings. So, but the important point to remember is before then it wasn't collected at all. And I don't know if you've been watching the debate in France over the last week or so. I mean, the data on ethnicity isn't collected in France. It's seen as against the values of the Republic to do that. And so that debate is actually coming to a head in France, where they have no data by ethnicity or race or any other protected characteristic. So I think as time goes by, we look for more nuanced pictures to enable us to be more precise about the action that we take to address inequalities. So the more that data gets broken down, the more it becomes possible to identify patterns, and those patterns enable intervention. And if I just give you an example from the last week, I found out, I've been looking at the diversity of the teaching population in Bristol. So certain assumptions have been made about that diversity. When you actually look at the data that underpins it, the data that's used to make conclusions is actually about nationality. because that's the information the government collect about teachers for visa-related reasons. But that becomes translated into statements about the diversity. So, for example, if you're British, there is just one category British. So if you to not be in that category, you've literally got to have a different passport. So it doesn't help us at all to analyse the diversity of the teacher workforce in any meaningful way that allows intervention. So, for example, in Golden Key, by doing this, we've been able to identify groups, for example, within the GRT community, within the refugee asylum seekers, people with no right to remain community. And we've been able to do that because we've disaggregated the data to give us a more granular look at the actual detailed patterns, because then that enables you to interact with communities. I mean, even on the level of East Asian, which of course isn't an ethnic or racial group, it's, you know, I don't know, but I would imagine probably half of the world's population loosely could be described as East Asian. So it's not necessarily a good basis for action in terms of intervention with specific groups and communities.
Thank you. So one last question, and we've got literally 3 minutes to answer it. Is there anything that we can do strategically, or are there any particular roles that we should look for that would increase chances of progressing to further and better board roles and climbing the ranks?
Well, I think as a city, I think that's a basis for action. Bristol has done a lot of work, for example, on diversifying the magistrates population, for example. And maybe that initiative could be re-energised and broadened. So it's starting from the heart of the democratic process in Bristol. It's saying this city is committed to increasing diversity on boards, and we are going to take these actions to achieve that. And I think, you know, Marvin is in a great position as an elected mayor to do that. But that would probably be the most powerful way, I would imagine.
I mean, the only thing I'll add to that is, yeah, inclusive leadership. I think, you know, John touched on that. Inclusive leaders that understand the need and what the stakeholders want, you know, like I've mentioned, the millennials and what people's expectations are. But I think it's really good for us to take action as well. Like I mentioned at the start, initiatives like Stepping Up that really involved more than 50 different organizations, and, you know, spoken to partners and said, look, let's collaborate, let's improve diversity and inclusion, let's take action together. And I think, yeah, it's those sort of initiatives that bring the community organizations and, you know, public sector, private sector together that would actually be able to lead to the change that we are all desiring.
Thank you. Jason?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that within social organisations, social care organisations that deliver services to service users, which I hate that term, to be honest, should have lived experience or people with lived experience involved from a steering group level all the way down. It will help. It just will. It ain't loads of money. It's not like you're going to have to pay them what you would have to pay a qualified professor or someone with all these. Use some of those local resources, local communities, and that's in the business sector as well. Use some of your staff. If they're not getting the right deal, then they should be a part of that organisational group that seeks to make change. If you don't involve the people you're hurting, how are you going to intellectually work out what you need to do? You need to get in contact with emotion as well as intellectual, combine the two, and hopefully we live ever happy after.
And just like that, it's 9:30 and we've run out of time. I feel like we could have carried on talking for quite some time, actually. That was such a good discussion. So thank you very much, Saida, John, Jason, for being here today and talking to us. And thank you to all our attendees who were up bright and early to listen to you. And I wish you a really lovely end of the day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.